Part 2. The Music of Zagarna. Once the Dern crags were behind him, Vonatar allowed Alia to trot along at her own pace. Now that they were in the Darklands, the color of the scenery shifted. Even the sky seemed to have taken on a different hue. It was as if the air itself contained a tint of misery. There was a faint but vile smell of burning sulfur in the air, and ahead he could see that the foliage ended completely. A tract of grey desert extended to the horizon. Vonatar was so daunted and depressed by what he saw that he failed to notice a more imminent danger. A platoon of Giaks had been watching him from behind some boulders, and now that he was within their grasp, they broke cover and came rushing towards his back. He heard a noise and twisted in his saddle to face the advancing pack. All were armed and mounted on doom wolves, and all looked hostile. Arrows, spears, and swords were aimed directly at him. It was a matter of reflex for him to construct a protective shield around himself. As an afterthought, he added one around Alia as well. He had acted only just in time, for a swarm of missiles was immediately launched at him. The shield protected him completely. Arrows, spears, and slingshot stones disappeared, to be replaced by angrily buzzing hornets. The insects flew off over the wastelands. Yet Vonatar was terrified. The degree of magic he had required to maintain the shield was considerable, and so was the pain. "Orkatak! Zutkorak!" said one of them. "Tag! Tag!" Vonatar recognized the word tag. It meant kill. He waved a hand and brought a Nadziranim spell into existence. The Giak who had spoken became a column of flame. The other Giaks were prepared to turn and run. One of them, rather braver than the rest, took a pace towards Vonatar and held up his hands to symbolize that his intentions were peaceful. "You, human," he said with difficulty. "You, enemy. Why, you, here." Vonatar spoke enough of the Giak's precise language to be able to reply to it. "I am here to help the Dark Lords." This caused much muttering among the 20 or so members of the patrol. They concluded that either this was a madman or he was a spy. Most of them believed that he was a spy. Caught in the act, he was coming out with a tall tale in order to try to escape with his skin intact. Vonatar understood much of this and responded by reducing another Giak to a heap of ash. On the other hand, most of the mutterers now concluded, it seems extremely likely that he's indeed that rarest of things, a Somlending who wishes to assist our masters. "Take me to Dark Lord Zagarna," demanded Vonatar clearly, tossing back his mane of black hair. "I have much to tell him." The Giaks recognized a strong leader when they saw one. Without another word of dissent, they gestured that he should follow them and set out towards the desert. Silent Wolf was limping and weeping when he finally came over the crest of a gentle hill and saw the Kai monastery ahead of him. For 2 days he had pushed his body to the limit using Kai skills he had only half developed during his classes. He had paused neither to eat nor drink. He had lost several pounds in weight, and his hands trembled when he held them up before his eyes. Stormhawk's death would not be in vain, he told himself. Vengeance can be a hollow word, but it wasn't really vengeance that he wanted. Instead, he had determined to become as fine a Kai master as Stormhawk had been, finer. If evil, such as what he had seen, was at loose in the world, then it was his duty to combat it, and the means to perform that duty were the disciplines of Kai. His achievement would be a way of perpetuating Stormhawk's name, of preserving his tutor's renown for the centuries to come. He was greeted at the monastery gate by 2 of his other tutors. Their faces were grim. One clasped Silent Wolf briefly to his breast in an expression of sorrow more eloquent than words could ever have been. Then they led him to Stormhawk's study. Only, of course, now it wasn't Stormhawk's study. It was the same room, but clearly it belonged to someone else. The clutter had gone, and in its place were tidiness and order. The only thing there that Silent Wolf could remember from before was the human skull, which still lay in its place on the desk. The transformation of the room brought home to the youth the fact that his tutor was of his battered body. "How did you know?" The voice was hardly his own. "We were told," one of the tutors, Winter Owl, said gently. He gestured towards the empty skull. "All we know is that Stormhawk is dead. Our grief is too great to be spoken. Now, tell us what happened, and then you can go to your dormitory to get some sleep." He told them of the journey to the Dern Crags, What Stormhawk had heard there turned, and his own staggering, limping, miserable return to the monastery. He gave details as he could remember. Finally, he lay back in his chair, drained. "Are you sure there was nothing else?" "Quite sure," said Silent Wolf. "No, there was something. When we met that magician, Stormhawk said something about the Nadziranim." He was falling asleep now. He tried to resist it, but found he couldn't. His eyelids slowly closed, and his body, which for days and nights had felt like ice, became warm. "This is bad news indeed, worse than we had ever imagined. Much worse. This magician is clearly a member of the Brotherhood of the Crystal Star. Even one mad magician roaming the land could make things very hard for us. We are ill able, particularly so close to Fehmarn, to afford to send out a party to deal with the problem. No, magic must be fought by magic. The Guildmaster at Toran must know of this renegade by now. He will have sent a party in pursuit." "Winter Owl, there is one thing that troubles me." "Yes?" "This magician was heading towards the Dern Crags. Is it not possible that he might be intending to cross them? His secrets would be worth a great deal to the Dark Lords." "Not a chance of it. No human could survive long in the Darklands. If the man tried, that would be to our advantage, because Zagarna's spawn would kill him on sight." Bannerton remembered the previous evening only too well. The summons from the Guildmaster of the Brotherhood of the Crystal Star had terrified him. Such summonses were usually for disciplinary reasons. Bannerton was understandably trembling a little as he rapped on the staunch oak door of the Guildmaster's private study. "Come in, child." Bannerton was startled. He had expected sternness, but instead the Guildmaster sounded paternal. The boy's mind was filled with grotesque images as he pushed the door open. "What are you thinking, Bannerton?" "Oh, nothing in particular." "Well, come and sit down beside me." The Guildmaster moved along the wooden bench behind his desk and gestured that Bannerton should join him. "I have a task for you." "What?" said Bannerton, then blushed. His single word had hardly contained the respect owed to the most highly honored member of the Brotherhood of the Crystal Star. "I mean—" "No need to apologize. I understand your surprise." He then told Bannerton about the flight of Vonatar and his fear that the renegade magician would betray the Kai to the Dark Lords. "We know that the forces of evil plan to launch an assault upon Sommerlund sometime this summer, maybe not until next summer if we're lucky. But one of our brothers, Vonatar, who I had intended to appoint as my successor, has betrayed our trust and fled to join the Dark Lord Zagarna at Karg. It may be that Vonatar will never reach there, and even if he does, he may be slaughtered out of hand, but it's possible that he'll survive long enough to give the Dark Lord information that could assist the invasion. The Kai must be told of all this, and they must be told soon." He pulled a rolled-up piece of parchment from his voluminous robe and set it on the desk in front of the young acolyte. "It is not often that your tutors tell you that you are uniquely qualified to serve the Brotherhood, is it?" "Not often," agreed Bannerton. He swallowed. He was one of the least skilled of the pupils in the guild. Bannerton smiled agreeably, wishing he were somewhere else. "The reason I have asked you here this evening is that I need someone to take that message of warning to the Kai Grand Master. The duty of the guild will, of course, be to use the magical forces at our command to try to resist the invaders. Still, we must spare somebody to take that message. You are old enough, Bannerton." The Guildmaster turned to stare at the acolyte through the shadows. "Aye, you are old enough, and of all the pupils of your age, you are the least competent to aid us with your magical powers. We can spare you to act as a journeyman." Bannerton shivered and tried to wrap himself more firmly in his cloak. Ahead of him, the light of the guard post at Torran's south gate was a blur through the mist of his breath. He had been grateful earlier to find that the snow had stopped, but now the cold of the early spring pre-dawn air gripped at his chest so tightly that he fervently wished the snow would start again. Nina, the old brown mare which had been issued to him at the stables, shifted unhappily under his weight. He wondered if she would endure the rigors of the cold and the journey. Built into the south gate was the guard post, a room about 20 feet square. Bannerton shiveringly slithered down from Nina's back and pounded on the door with his heavy staff. "Who are you?" the guard screamed into the freezing darkness. "I am a member of the Brotherhood of the Crystal Star," said Bannerton. He wished his voice didn't sound so nervous and wobbly. "I've been given a letter by our guildmaster and have been told to—" "Come closer to the window!" Gingerly, Bannerton moved to frame his face in the shattered glass. "That child!" He stared at the youth through one rheumy, bloodshot eye. "What do you want?" "I need the gate to be opened," said Bannerton. He smiled innocently in the way he'd been trained to do when confronted by potential enemies of superior strength. The guard stared at him murderously for a few seconds, then turned to operate the heavy system of pulleys and chains, muttering tightly about the boy's direct descent from a Giak so loathsome that he revolted even other Giaks. The gate swung ponderously open, the ice on its mighty wooden hinges squeaking in protest. "Go, child, before I add your ears to my collection." Bannerton pulled himself with difficulty onto the reluctant Nina, and with his heels prodded her forward through the great gate, which was slammed with venomous finality behind him. Bannerton shivered, but not just from the cold. This was the first time he had ever ventured outside the walled city of Toran, and he was terrified by the sight of all that space. His terror soon subsided, however, as the sun rose. Nina plodded on through the thin snow, and the scrunch of her hooves acted as a counterpoint to the song of the birds. Off to his right, the sharp peaks of the Derncrag Mountains bit into the pale sky. Although Bannerton was still freezing cold, the light of the rising sun made him feel warmer. He had ridden all morning and was making good progress until he and Nina passed through a small copse, and just as they came out of it, the sunlight was blotted out for a few moments. Bannerton instinctively clutched at Nina's mane for reassurance. Even after the light had rather nervously returned, he could feel his heart pumping. A few hundred yards ahead, there was a small mound by the side of the road. On it sat a young woman, the first person he had seen since leaving Toran. As he drew closer, he could make out more details of her appearance. Her skin was nut brown, and her short cropped hair was a coppery red. She was dressed in a battered leather jerkin and ragged trousers. Her face was thin and somewhat pinched. Her cheekbones were prominent. He guessed she was about the same age as himself, perhaps a year or two older. Bannerton was startled when, at his approach, she scurried down from the mound to stand in the road in front of him. She raised her right hand to halt him, and obediently he tugged on Nina's reins. The pony snorted with relief and began to crop grass from the verge. "Hello, Bannerton." Hello? How do you know my name? Have we met before?" "Yes, but not yet." Bannerton looked baffled. When he realized that he was looking baffled, he tried to stop doing so. The result was that he looked confused instead. The woman laughed, but sympathetically. The sound reminded Bannerton of the flitter of fingers over the strings of a harp. "We have met many times in the future," she said. "But of course you can't remember that. The time will come, boy magician, when you too will be able to remember things the way I do." "Who are you?" Bannerton asked after a while. "Alice," she said. "That doesn't tell me very much. Everyone has a name. I mean, who are you? You don't seem to be like other people I've met." Alice considered this for a moment. "It'll be difficult for you to accept this," she said. "You have been locked away in Toran all these years, but I'm me. No one else. There aren't any others like me. I can do things that the people of the Brotherhood of the Crystal Star could never imagine, even in their dreams." "Are you human?" "Sort of, but not very much." "Are you a servant of the Dark Lords?" He shocked himself by the audacity of the question. She sat up. All traces of her ease and laziness vanished. "Of course I'm—" she began, and then she smiled. "Sorry, I forgot you can't remember the future. No, I'm here precisely because I'm going to help you and someone else resist the Dark Lords." What do you mean? Who is this other person? No one you know as yet. You'll know him once you meet him. Alice relaxed back onto the grass again. A white butterfly settled onto her pointy nose, and she went cross-eyed as she looked at it. Then she giggled, and it fluttered away. Bannerton looked at Nina, who looked back at him. There was still a long road to the Kai Monastery, and here was he, wasting time with someone whom he increasingly believed to be a madwoman. On the other hand, she had known his name. I have a message to carry to the Kai Grand Master, and I've already spent too long with you. Bannerton, you can be very stupid sometimes. Isn't it clear to you yet that I know about things like that? Alice tossed her head impatiently. I could recite your message word perfect if I wanted, which, let it be plain, I don't. Bannerton said nothing. Anyway, said Alice, I will be a part of your life, here and there, over the next few years. Each time I come to help you, you will be able to know who I am, don't worry. In the meantime, do you like the form I've adopted especially for you? Bannerton looked at her freshness and her clarity and her light, and nodded his agreement. Yes, she looked almost beautiful. She smiled, and disappeared. Moments later, Bannerton found there was a money spider on the back of his hand. He shook it carefully onto the turf. As it dropped away, he heard a crystal-clear voice speaking in his mind. Goodbye, at least for now. Karg. Rising in the midst of a plain of dust and ash, the mighty walls of the fortress seemed to touch the sky. Thousands of Giaks had perished building Karg, the greatest of the Dark Lord fortresses after Helgadad. The Giaks had been crushed by tumbling boulders, whipped to death by maddened overseers, driven until they expired by the inexorable will of Zagarna, the cruelest Dark Lord since the terrible time when Agarash had held sway. A few slits had been set into the walls to allow air into the titanic fortress, but apart from these, the face of Karg was almost featureless. Karg was 40 miles across, and it rose 2 miles into the sky. It squatted like some vile reptile on a vile floor. Kran, Zlanbeast, and Cryptspawn fluttered around its cloud-high parapets. Their droppings formed a deep carpet on the arid plain surrounding the fortress. Their cackling cries were everywhere as they swooped hither and thither through the air. Sometimes they fought, and blood would rain from the sky. A dead beast would be devoured before it reached the ground. Twice a day, at sunrise and sunset, thousands of swamp Giaks, considered guilty of some supposed crime, would be led out in front of the fortress, tethered in place, and left to serve as living fodder for the flying creatures. Zagarna enjoyed watching feeding time, and always tried to do so. The shrill screams of the doomed Giaks were like music to him. The Zlanbeast were bred in the deepest pits of Helgadad. On their broad backs, the Dark Lords rode the skies. Their wings were bat-like with sharp talons. Their serrated beaks were well over 6 feet long. The Kran were a subspecies. Smaller than the Zlanbeast, they were nevertheless equally vicious. They served as mounts for the Drakarim, the pitiless humanoid servants of the Dark Lords. The Cryptspawn likewise had the wings of a bat, but their bodies could not have been more dissimilar from those of the Zlanbeast and Kran. Neither could their origins. They came from a different plane of existence, the one occupied by the Dark Lord's evil master, Na. Whenever the Cryptspawn numbers fell too low, more could be called to Magnamund by the Dark Lords. Their bodies were like human brains. Behind them they trailed skeletal appendages. The sun was setting. The Zlanbeast stabbed their beaks into the chests of the tethered Giaks, so that ichor spurted into the pallid orange air. The sight pleased Zagarna. He turned reluctantly from the slit window through which he had been watching the carnage and clapped his fanged jaws appreciatively. The sight had made him hungry. He looked at the 50 Drakarim in the room and speculated. Just at that moment, a Drakar servant hurried in, bearing a platter on which lay a steaming Giak haunch. Zagarna accepted it, and fed it to his second mouth, which was located in his midriff. It crunched away with steady menace while he spoke to the assembled Drakarim.
How do our plans fare?
They had to strain to hear. Its quietness was all the more terrifying, bearing in mind the hugeness of his form. Standing, he was nearly 20 feet tall. His skin was scaled and colored blue and green. The outsides of his arms and legs were studded with sharp claws, as were his hands and feet. A double row of claws ran backwards from his forehead and down his spine. From his horned face projected a massive jaw in which were set knife-sharp teeth longer than a man's hand. He leaned back in his throne, and stained saliva ran from both his mouths. The Drakarim shuffled uneasily.
Speak.
O Lord of all that is dark, these are early days in our...
Silence, you fool! I don't want excuses. In 3 months' time, I will subject Sommerlund to the rule of darkness, the rule of our master, Na. So tell me what you have been doing to advance our cause, or by Na, I shall disembowel you myself and select new advisors.
One of the tallest of the Drakarim stepped forward. Most mighty one, I cower in the face of your awesomeness, but I cannot lie to you. Zagarna wanted to kill the Drakar, but clutched the arms of his great metal throne to hold himself back.
Your name?
Alice, O Lord of the Damned. He seemed remarkably calm for someone who was a mere hair's breadth from a very gruesome death.
Well, Alice, if you don't wish to lie to me, and if you are not eager to tell me your news, I can only assume that your news is bad. How bad?
Sire and Master of Evil, we have amassed the troops you requested. We have sufficient Giaks and Gurgas to enslave Sommerlund twice over, but even a Giak must have weapons if it is to fight effectively. Only 1 in 10 of the Giaks are armed. Without swords and axes, any attempt we made this summer would be doomed. The Kai would repel us easily. Far better to wait until summer next year.
This Drakar's nerve is amazing,
thought Zagarna, against the rage that filled most of his mind.
I must make sure that his death comes soon and is especially unpleasant. The Drakarim are useful, but what would happen if I allowed any of them to become too useful? You are a bearer of bad news. There is a tradition about bearers of bad news.
Your Highness, it is a foolish tradition. If you fail to take note of bad news, then you will be unable to convert it into wise courses of action. Here you have a choice. Either you can postpone the invasion until next year, or you can persuade those at Helgedad, Nadgazad, and Arnak to forge out weapons more swiftly.
You are right. And you will be dead by morning, he added silently. Send messages at once to Helgedad. If we need weapons, then first we must have weapon makers. Tell Fularash that yet more Giaks must be spawned. It is my will that we do not delay our attack until next year.
Certainly, Great One, said the curiously courageous Drakar.
You are new to me. Drakarim are all oddly alike, yet I cannot remember having seen one like you before. Where do you come from?
The Drakar waved his arms. Where do we all come from? From the bosom of Nar himself, of course. Late that night, a troop of Giaks burst into the room where the strange Drakar called Alice slept. Sent under the express instructions of Zagarna, their intention was to carry out a slow execution. But the Drakar's bunk was empty, the bedclothes unruffled. The Giaks reported to their superiors that the execution had been a long and anguished one. Nobody ever volunteers to be breakfast.